Hey everyone, Kate from the Narrate team here. Life seems unfair at times. This week, Josh explores and asks questions from two stories that Jesus shared on the kingdom of heaven, fairness, and generosity.
Hey, good morning. It's good to see all of you. Who else of you appreciates the color electric blue and is considering a run for the U.S. presidency? That's awesome. So today we have a lot to talk about. We're going to be talking about a couple of stories that Jesus shared with us, and those stories touch on really two themes. One of those is the conflict that we have to deal with in the world, and that conflict is fairness versus unfairness. And then also the second theme is that there is a generosity, particularly a generosity of God, that crashes into this conflict of fairness versus unfairness, and he essentially deconstructs it. And we'll talk in more detail about that after we read those stories. But I want to start off by sharing a couple of personal stories about my wrestling with fairness versus unfairness. One of them being more just kind of fun, and it didn't have like any kind of significant effect on my life. And then another one that has required a great deal of energy to wrestle with something that I have believed to be unfair in moments. So, with all that said, let's just giddy up. Several years ago, I had an opportunity to go to a rodeo in Choteau, Montana, which is just west of Great Falls. In fact, David Letterman has a cabin up there, and he was also attending this rodeo. At one point, my family and I and our friends were walking down the street, and David Letterman was walking like 100 yards away from us on a street that was running perpendicular to us. And my dad, being the person that he is, he just yelled out, "Hey, Dave!" And Dave, assuming that he was Dave Letterman, assuming he's the Dave that's being addressed, he kind of just waved and kept walking. But anyway, ourselves, along with David Letterman, we're going to attend this rodeo, and I'm not super familiar with that world, so I'm reading the flyer that they gave all to us and trying to understand why a guy would want to ride a horse that's trying to kill him. At the end of this little flyer, it said, at the end of the rodeo, there's going to be a wild cow milking contest. Now, if you don't know what that is, it is whenever they take like a legitimately wild cow that's had little to no human interaction, as in, I guess, like on one of those giant ranches and doesn't see people very often at all. And they bring it into an environment that is totally foreign for it. You know, there's a few thousand spectators there. And then they put a rope on that cow and then have a handful of fools grab onto that rope and try to get it under control. And then these people are trying to milk that cow. And in this rodeo, you know, they had like 6 cows and 6 teams. And I read this on the flyer. And then I kind of had a conversation with my dad and our friends, and we're trying to convince one another, should we do this or not? And, you know, we're extremely naive. We're thinking to ourselves that this is going to be like PBS, like Mr. Rogers going to the farm and milking some cow that's, you know, essentially just a large dog. We didn't think it would be like a lion in the Coliseum. And so, you know, we convinced ourselves to do it, and so we went and signed up, and then we're reading about, or we're watching the remainder of the events, and then it's time to go to the wild cow milking extravaganza, and we get down there, and, you know, I'm walking into the, like, arena, the rodeo arena. It's that soft dirt that you see, and it starts to register for me, like, this is not a good idea. like, what seemed like a good idea is a horrific reality. And, I'm observing my surroundings. There's a few thousand people there, and they're just like cheering, like this is, and it made me recollect like this primitive like Coliseum culture. There's like while we're standing there, and like in these pens are all these lions that they're about to release. And I'm looking at our competitors. There's several other teams, you know, and I'm looking at these guys, and they're all like really big, like 250, 275 pound, like lineman kind of guys with these gnarly boots and Carhartt coveralls and like a hockey mask and these thick gloves that, you know, that we use for like welding. And then I look at us, and we have tennis shoes on. One of my friends, his name is Raji. Some of you might know him. He has flip-flops on. And we all have shorts on and a t-shirt. And for gloves, I think we just took some of my mom's gardening gloves out of her car. So like we look like we're geared up to plant some petunias. And these other teams are ready for the battle, you know. And then they start the countdown, like 5, 4, 3, and then they release the Kraken, so to speak. And this cow runs out of its pen. And as soon as that rope got tight, it's like we're all like holding on to it, it just jerks us all like all over the place. At one point, we were literally being drugged. Like I could feel dirt like running across my face and shoulder as I'm holding on to this rope. I let go of it also at one point and kind of gained my bearings. And as soon as I did, I looked up and the cow is running directly for me. And it slammed its head into my chest and threw me back like 10 feet. I fell on my back and then looked up and it's still running for me. Except this time I'm on the ground. And I just start to crab walk backwards, like faster than anyone has ever crab walked in human history. And I got out of the way, and then we did this for a couple of minutes, despite the fact that it, like no more than 2 minutes probably, despite the fact that it felt like hours. And the cow got tired, and it just kind of like got down on its, like kind of on its knees, kind of just slouched down. And we're like, this is our chance. And so my dad, I don't know what he was thinking, he just like put his body on its face. and then me and my other friend, we're just like bear hugging it like this. Like that's going to do anything. Like it's like we're comforting it or something. And it would be like if I'm crouching down right now and I had 2 infants on my back. Oh no, I can't move now, you know. And Raji, he has the bottle in his pocket and he starts milking this wild cow. And I'm looking at him. I'm like holding the cow, well, theoretically, holding the cow down, and I'm looking at Raji, and he's just running with this bottle of milk toward the like finishing table, and we were the first team to get our bottle filled with milk. It was like a number 15 seed Middle Tennessee beating a number 2 seed Michigan State. It should not have happened. And you know, I'm trying to cheer. I'm like holding on the cow like, yeah, okay, hand back down. But then we were kind of let down because at the end, after all the dust had settled, literally, the director guy said, you guys are actually disqualified because you had 4 people and every other team only had 3. I'm like, yeah, but the rule book says teams of 3 to 5 people. And he's like, yeah, but you had 4 and everyone else had 3. And so that's kind of imbalanced. I'm like, no, it's perfectly balanced because 3 of those guys equals like 7 of us. You know, we should be fine. And we kind of bickered against one another for a little while. And then it just kind of got to the point where, well, we'll just for our own pride that say that we won and just give up the prize to the runner-up. And so we did that. And it was, you know, a pretty meaningless prize. It was like $20 to like some burger joint. But anyway, we're driving home later that night, and seriously, I have like blood on my leg, like blood and dirt, still wearing my petunia planting gloves. I wasn't. And we're like, that's not very fair. It wasn't our plan, but we put our lives on the line, and we did not win the prize that we deserved. We worked hard for that, and we did not get the prize that we deserved. Now, of course, other than it being quite dangerous, this event, it doesn't have any real effect on my life. I've brushed it off within the evening. But then there are other circumstances, like all of you, that I've had to deal with, where it's like, I don't think this is very fair. One of those is something that I have had to wrestle with and have, by God's grace and a great deal of work, developed a muscle of contentment in. But being an American, and being a Christ follower, so that being that I have several friends who are Christ followers, to be a single person is a bit of a rarity. And like I said, that contentment muscle has been developed a bit, again, with lots of work and God's help. But there were periods in my life where I was like, what's wrong? Like I understand that I am chock full of mistakes, but so is that guy, so is that couple. It's not like I haven't tried, it just hasn't worked out. Like that's not fair. I had to really wrestle with that, and it required a significant amount of energy. What in your life, you can go to that next slide. Uh-oh. There it is. All right. What in your life do you find unfair? This could be in the workplace. You might have a coworker that's only been working for your company for 6 months, a year or so, and they seem to receive more favor and respect from your employer, despite the fact that you've been working for them for 5, 10 years, working the best as you can, serving them as well as you can, and this coworker of yours is getting more appreciated. We see this in households, favoritism, where one sibling receives more care and love than the others. It happens time and time again in the Old Testament, households that have to wrestle with favoritism. Maybe you are a student and you think to yourself, why was that girl born to be so much prettier than me? Or maybe you're a boy student and you think to yourself, why does the jerk guy get all the girls? And here I am trying to treat women well and it's not working out for me. The reality is we live in a world that seems remarkably unfair. And so I want to ask you guys, what in your life seems unfair? Or maybe another way to ask it is, what is that thing that happens in your life that you ask, why is this happening to me? Because inherent within that question is, well, I didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve for this to happen to me. Or I've been working hard for this thing to happen and it still hasn't. Why is this happening to me? What in your life seems unfair? Now, I understand that that's a heavy question. But please bear with me for a minute, because in these stories that we're going to be reading from Jesus, we see the generosity of God crash into this conflict of fairness and unfairness. So just bear with me for a minute. One of those stories that Jesus shares is in Matthew 20, and it's a story that details a worker, an employer, a vineyard owner, a farmer, and he is hiring people to work in his vineyard. Some of them he hired early in the morning, some of them midday, some mid-afternoon, some into the evening really, and then he ends up paying them all the same. And the people who started early in the day are a bit outraged, reasonably so, that they did not get paid this or more than those who only worked for an hour or two. Anyway, let's just read it really quickly. It's in Matthew 20. It starts off like this. Jesus starts it like this. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 a.m, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, you also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right. So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 p.m, and did the same thing. About 5 p.m, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? Because no one has hired us, they answer. So that's indicative that, they were trying. They were trying to become employed. He said to them, you also go and work in my vineyard. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. The workers who were hired about 5 p.m. came and each received a denarius. So when those who came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble, rage against the landowner. These who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. A couple of observations. First off, there's employee A, and employee A seems to have it all together. They are well educated and probably from an excellent university and have a strong resume, have done all of the extracurricular activities and volunteered, so they have a strong resume, are highly skilled, most attractive personality, most attractive just in their looks. They are picked up right off the bat. And then we have the B through F employees as well, the ones that were hired at 9, noon, 3, and 5. And those were less and less attractive. They were picked up later and later on in the day. They did not have it as together. They might have even had a record that was playing against them. They maybe even had a tattered job history. They weren't the first choice. They weren't, so to speak, the cream of the crop. And then there's an employer, and the employer says, no, I'm going to hire you guys, and I'm going to give generously to all of you. Just to share some context, parable, the original meaning of that term means to place aside. And so what we see, or Jesus is comparing this to the kingdom of heaven. It says it right there in the first verse of this story. The kingdom of heaven is like, and then he shares this story. He's matching it, at least in some way, synonymizing these two together. On top of that, kingdom is very familiar language for these people, because the primary recipients of this story were the Jewish people, and they had been anticipating for centuries being oppressed people by dictators and empires and so on. They had developed an understanding that no, that at some point a Messiah, a God, is going to come and overturn the society in which we live. And finally, we will get what we deserve, and those who have oppressed us will get what's coming to them. And then God says in this story, Jesus says in this story that no, I have come to give equally to and generously to all. Fast forward several years, a man by the name of Matthew records this in text. And his primary audience was Jewish readers. And so what if Matthew, the writer of this story, was trying to ask his readers, his Jewish readers, what if the kingdom that we've been thinking about for several centuries now is not the one that's coming? What if this kingdom is not a physical kingdom that's going to overturn the society in which we live, but this kingdom is a kingdom within us, among us. And in this kingdom there is a God, there is a king who is going to give generously, graciously to everyone in the society, to all. Now, when you read a story like this, it's like, yeah, that's great, but I'm still dealing with the unfair circumstance. Listen, I know that some of you are dealing with some significant difficulty. And I don't in any way want to come across as trite. I know that some of you are dealing with something that's way more difficult to manage than just being a single dude. One of the Proverbs, I think, is very connected to this phenomenon of dealing with unfairness. It says this, that hope deferred, fairness deferred, it makes the heart sick. But a longing fulfilled, equality, fairness, is a tree of life. So please know that I don't want to just come across as oh yeah, well, life isn't fair, so just don't worry about it. Please know that I'm trying to share from these stories with you and wrestle through the world that we live in that has to deal with the conflict of fairness and unfairness with you. Jesus shares in another story that's famously known as the parable of the prodigal son. It details a father and two of his kids. One of them is the older son. He's kind of that type A personality, very self-motivated, worked hard, has an excellent GPA, did the extracurricular activities, strong resume. He argued to his dad in this story that I have never disobeyed your commandments. He has it all together. And then there's a younger son who is a bit of a wild child and preemptively takes the inheritance that he has coming to him from his father and then goes out and the text says squanders it, tramples it, wastes it. All that his father had worked hard to attain and then freely gave to him, this son just totally trashed it. To the point to where he was in such a ditch from the consequences of his bad decisions that he got to the point where it's I've got to do something because I'm in a really, really bad spot. And so I'm going to go back home and just hope that my dad has just an ounce of mercy to make me his slave. So at least then I know that I'm going to be eating food and what's going to happen to me the next day. And so he decides to do that and he goes home. The text says that his father was waiting for him and that whenever he got home, his father and family, they celebrated the return of this younger son, and they had a party. And then the older son caught wind of this, and he's not entirely happy with it. The text says this: "Meanwhile, the older son was in the field, and when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.'" A couple of weeks ago, I was on vacation, and I visited my family in Texas. And I have one younger brother, and he's kind of all over the world right now in his stage of life. And so it's actually a rarity that all four of us can be together, with me here, him all over, and mom and dad in Texas. But all four of us were together. And because Texas has excellent food, we ate from the fattened calf. And I remember hearing my mom say like 35 times, or my dad say like 35 times over the course of the 6 days to my mom, "Mom, sure is great to have the boys home and be eating from the fattened calf," which in Texas is tacos and barbecue. But the text continues. "The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father," and you feel the angst in these words, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property," you hear the accusation, "with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." In this story, we see the older son upset with his dad because he feels like he deserves that celebration just as much, if not more, than that younger brother who has lived a life of disobedience toward his father. And then the father, he confronts that by saying, no, it doesn't work that way. The love I have for you, it wasn't earned. It hasn't been earned. It won't be earned. From the start, everything I have is yours. And also, there's nothing you could do to make me love you less. Just like your younger brother, there's nothing he could do to earn my love. It's there. And there's nothing he could do to make me love him less. Even take the money that I worked hard for all of my life and then freely gave him, and he completely wasted it. Even then, I do not love him less. There's nothing that neither of you could do to make me love you more, and nothing you could do to make me love you less. How similar are we sometimes to that older son? And so whenever we think about that unfair circumstance, we think to ourselves that, first off, this isn't fair, and so that kind of just fills you with this angst, or as that first story said, envy. And then also, if this is the unfair circumstance that I'm dealing with, then I'm just going to have to work harder, try harder, and then it will get better. As if you earn God's generosity. And God, in these stories, these parables, setting it aside to the kingdom of God, he's saying, no, it doesn't work that way. My generosity has been available to you from the start. Everything I have is yours. How did it work for employee A or the older son to be filled with this anger toward the employer, toward his father? How did it work for them to try to think to themselves that they could strive for their generosity, strive for their affection, strive for their love? And the father and the employer are like, no, I'm giving generously to you all. How has it worked for you in that unfair circumstance to be filled with that angst, to be filled with that upsetness within you? Now, I understand that doesn't change things, right? It doesn't change the things that you are experiencing. But what I want to ask is, what if we could align ourselves more with those grade B through F employees, or with that younger son, and be like, I understand that whatever I have received is a gift. Of course, working hard rewards well, but then also there's a dose of God's grace too. And so whatever I have received is a gift from God. I have done nothing to earn it. There's two kingdoms that Jesus is talking about here. There's the human kingdom. And the human kingdom involves that only the best are the ones who receive. Only the ones who are the most attractive, stronger, better, smarter, more articulate, only those who receive. And if you are not receiving, then it is because there is some way in which you are not good enough. And God is saying that's not how the kingdom of heaven works. The kingdom of heaven is available to all. The kingdom of heaven is very much opposed to this human kingdom that you have to wrestle through day in and day out. So I want to ask two questions because, again, that you're still wrestling with that unfair circumstance, right? The first question is this. You can go to that next slide. How has God been inexplicably generous to you? What if the starting point for us in this circumstance is gratitude? And so we can look back on our lives and think of moments in which God has been inexplicably generous to you. You might have a job that you love, and you understand that through high school and college or whatever, that you weren't working toward that job, but now it is, at least in some ways, fallen into your life, and Monday through Friday are an excellent part of your week. You might have a spouse, and of course you knew that they were a good person when you married them, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you did not realize how much God had gifted you with such a gracious, kind, understanding person. You might have children, and of course, you've worked hard for them to be good people, for them to grow up to be loving, generous, kind people. But you also understand that it was God's help in that. I'm going to move over here. What if starting from that platform will instill within your heart a trust and a peace? No, this God is generous. And then you can ask the question, what in my life is unfair? And I'm going to put it underneath God's generosity and understand that there is nothing that I can do to earn it, but I trust him. And I know that he loves me. I know that he's for me. Just like the father says to the older son, everything I have is yours. We're about to enter an historical week in Christian history, where we celebrate Good Friday, the death of Jesus, and then 3 days later, his resurrection. There is no more grand of a display of God's gift toward us than for Jesus to lay down his life for us so that we might be reconciled to him. And then for him to trample over death by death with the resurrection. There's nothing that we have done to deserve that. There's nothing that we have done to earn that. But it's that God freely giving himself up for us. And that moment in history, it begs the question, which kingdom? Which kingdom do you embrace? The human kingdom, which says that only the best are chosen. The human kingdom that says that if you are not receiving, it's because of some way in which you are inadequate. Or the kingdom of heaven, which has a God, a king, who is generous to all. Which kingdom will you choose? How has God been generous to you? And what part of your life could you give to God's generosity? This is yours, God. I trust you and believe that you love me in it. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you that it confronts the world in which we live in that can seem so remarkably unfair at times. God, I pray that we would trust you. by the example of who you are, that we would remember who you have already been to us. And that in that our hearts would be filled with this peace and this trust. And that we would give that unfair circumstance to you. God, this is yours. I place it underneath your generosity. And if it ends up being good and pleasing to my heart, I'll understand that it's not something that I earned. God, I pray that we would understand that everything you have is ours because of how generous of a king that you are. May we embrace this as we enter in such an historic event like the death and resurrection of Jesus. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.